joining us for today's AVST Live webinar. Today we're going to be talking about speech and transforming the workplace with your voice. Neil Butler, our Director of Sales Engineering, is going to be presenting. And before I turn it over to Neil, I want to mention a couple of things. First of all, we're going to be giving away a couple of Plantronics headphones. We won't do that during the live webinar, but if you're here and attending, you'll be eligible to win one. And if you're one of our lucky 2 people, I will email you later today with that news. And then the slides are available if you'd like to download those. Those are posted in the handouts area. There's a PDF you can grab if you're interested in reviewing the slides after we complete. And then in addition, we'll send those out to you in a follow-up email along with a link to the recording. And as always, if you've joined us on a webinar before, we have plenty of time for Q&A toward the end, and you're welcome to type your questions in at any time so we can have those ready for Neil when it's time. So with that, I'll let Neil get going.
Thank you, Ann, and welcome everyone. Thank you for attending the webinar. We're going to be looking at speech as a technology, speech recognition, and then some speech applications that obviously use that technology. And we'll talk a little bit about how we use speech and how people use speech in general when they bring it into the workplace and start interfacing with a computer, because there's some interesting preconceptions that people have that you have to understand to how to work around, and there's also quite a bit of history now in terms of how we've deployed speech. So we've been doing this for a long time. If you know much about our company, we're actually 2 companies rolled together. AVT originally was in the voicemail and call processing business, going back about 35 years. And we did not have speech rec applications, but at the time when we were acquired by Sound Advantage to become AVST, they already had a 10-year history in speech recognition. So we were able to take their software and technology and bring it over and put it on the AVST platform to give you what is now CXE. So the applications we're going to talk about are about 15 years old, most of them, in terms of how long we've been working on them and improving them. And that's good. We're not a first-gen speech application company, which is something you probably want to be a little careful of. And then also, we've had a lot of chance to learn, both from the technology itself, but also from customers, what to do and how to use speech and where it fits in and where you have to be careful with it. So in all of our software, we really divided things down into kind of 3 groups that we service in the enterprise. And this is kind of a pretty logical breakdown in terms of what goes on in most typical enterprises. You've got the individual workers, and today most of that really is about mobility. The basic desk worker, we've been presenting solutions to them for 30 years now, and there's not a whole lot new right now going on in that area, with the exception of some call completion. And then Teams is another new piece, collaboration. That's a very hot area, just because it's changing. People work different today. When you think of Teams and meetings, it's a lot different than it was a few years ago. And then the core business, the core enterprise itself, with messaging and call processing. All of those are a constant focus for us in every version of software that we do. We're lucky that our platform is very broad. We're not all things to all people in the unified communication space. We've focused on call and voice processing and where that interfaces with the enterprise, both in the telephony and groupware systems, and certainly the data systems as well. So we can deploy our product just about anywhere in just about any type of architecture. And the interoperability is definitely one of the pieces that we are famous for. We're not owned by a telephone system manufacturer or a networking company or anyone that has a specific agenda. Our agenda is to take our solutions and go out into the world to any customer in any kind of environment and be able to offer those solutions. So as a result, whereas some people come in and say, if you want to go to unified communications, what you need to do is rip and replace this part of your infrastructure, and we'll do that for you. And that's not our story. Our story is, here's what we do it in your environment, and by the way, when the time does come to change that environment, we'll do it with the new environment as well. Interoperability is very important not only at looking at what you're going to get today to make sure it works with where you are today, but keeping in mind that the way this industry is changing, the odds of that infrastructure you have today changing over the next few years is pretty high. And that's not only just the telephony infrastructure, but that's the groupware infrastructure, the networking architecture, all of that. So today we're going to focus on speech recognition in today's business. Now, speech recognition is very interesting. As I said, we've been in it about 15 years, which means, you know, we've got a slightly different view probably than most of our competitors do on it. We started in those early days when most people's idea of what speech recognition was came from the movie 2001, where the astronaut talks with the computer, and they have this conversation going back and forth. And the computer actually is a little more literate and a little more intelligent sounding than the astronaut. And that gave people the idea that you were having a conversation with a computer. And that's not what speech recognition is. Speech recognition is just an extension in programming. So if I wrote a program that worked on my desktop machine here, it'd have a nice window in it, it'd have a button I could click on, it would have a field where I could type some text in, it'd have some commands I could issue, and when I hit the button, the program knew what to do. Well, that's what speech recognition is when you're talking about using it for command and control. You write a program such that at a specific place in that program, the user has a list of things they can say. And when they say the correct thing, it does what they want. And if they don't say the correct thing, it comes back and basically reminds them, you know, that that's not a valid choice. So speech for command and control. Now, we have a lot of people say, well, you know, I use Dragon, naturally speaking, and I just dictate. It recognizes everything I say. Well, it recognizes and puts it down, although it doesn't really understand your meaning. It just recognizes the words. And secondly, you've trained it. When you first took Dragon out of the box, it wasn't very accurate. So you're using what's called speaker-dependent recognition, meaning it will learn your language and your voice patterns, and it'll get very, very accurate. But you can't really use speaker-dependent in an enterprise app where everybody that calls can be a different person. So we use speaker-independent, which means the way you build a good application is by building the grammar in such a way that it's intuitive, so it'll recognize the common things people feel they should say there. It's a little limited, so there's not so much in that grammar that it's slow or inaccurate, and that in any particular place, the grammar is fine-tuned for exactly what you're trying to do. And we'll kind of look at this concept as we look at our applications. One of the reasons buying a product from us that's 10 to 15 years old, depending on which piece of it, is we've been building our grammars for that long. What's that mean? That means that, you know, we put something in the grammar years ago and we realized that was an easy recognition conflict with some other thing they might say, so we figured out better ways to build that grammar. And as a result, our product's much more finely tuned, much more accurate than the other products you'll find. Even other products that use the same speech recognition engine that we do, and like most enterprise applications, we use Nuance, the engine itself, for speech recognition. The application piece, the grammar and what it does, that's all us. That's our 15 years in the industry, making sure that it works, it's easy to use, it's intuitive. And once again, having been using it now for about 15 years, most of us internally here are very comfortable talking about what it can do. If you look at speech in general, it's certainly in the last few years become much more prevalent. If you go back 15 years when we were first trying to sell it, there was just almost nothing that was speech rec, and it had, of course, everything had a mechanical sound to it when it was using text-to-speech to interact, and it wasn't very popular. But slowly, what people have figured out is speech rec can do things for you. It can increase your productivity, it can lower your costs of doing business. It can greatly reduce your transaction latency by making things available in an automated system that you really couldn't do with just dialing DTMF keys. And even if you only use it after hours as an extension for your automated attendant, the value is still extremely strong, and the technology is there and it's ready. Most of you have used speech recognition. Probably a good number of you have used it in the last week. And we see it, of course, in call centers, particularly the bigger companies went there quickly. You know, if you have 500 agents in a call center, to be able to take some portion of those calls and through speech recognition create a self-service app, that's a very powerful financial motivator. And that's where a lot of the technology, where the investment in technology came from. But as that technology got better and better, we were able to move that technology downstream from just the big call centers. And the next really popular version was the smartphones, the virtual personal assistants. Most of you have probably heard or used Siri or Google or Cortana. One of my favorites is Alexa, which is the Amazon speech rec device. And it sits in my lab. And when I walk in the door, I tell it to turn my lights on. I tell it what music I want to play. I set a reminder, a timer to remind me in 20 minutes to make a call. I've just really become enamored with the fact that speech rec through those kind of tools, it's just a really useful thing to have. Something that even a year ago I wasn't really using. And then, of course, desktop applications with dictation and for handicapped access have become very popular as well. And I do use Nuance Dragon, the recognition software. I write quite a few documents, and I found that although I'm not a very patient user, so I haven't really trained it as well as I should, it still reads my voice and puts it down on paper more accurately than I type. So I can go back and clean something up from dictation even easier than I can if I'd written it myself. So I don't think too many people today are anti-speech recognition. And we certainly aren't. We have 3 apps or 2 apps, depending on who you talk to within our company, that use speech recognition. And I'm going to talk about them as if they're 3 for a specific reason, because there's one part in here that's a little unclear to people. But we have an automated attendant that's speech recognition capable. So you can put in the Nuance speech recognition resources, and now our automated attendant can use speech recognition, not just for the directory, but for all the functionalities. And we'll see how that makes a big difference. And once again, being in business as long as we have, it's also true that there's more functionality in our system than anyone else, more problems solved because of the history that we have. The second piece here, the outside caller interface, a lot of people want to lump this with automated attendant, and this is the piece that your callers experience when they don't get sent through to someone. So if you call a speech automated attendant or a DTMF automated attendant, and it says, please enter the mailbox number of the person you're trying to reach, and you dial 1357. And that goes out and does a transfer. When it comes back, you're now going to present something to that outside caller. And what we found was people who call regularly into a customer actually kind of already know what those options are. So as soon as it comes back and they realize they didn't get through, they hit a pound key to start to leave a message or a 0 key to go to the operator. They know, what their choices are. When we started building the alternative telephone user interfaces so that we could mimic the Octel Aria and the Serenade TUIs, one of the first things we found that everyone had forgotten was the outside caller interface. It's great to make sure that from the user's point of view it's there, but when your customers have been calling you for 5 years and dialing a specific keystroke when they didn't get through to you, they get very frustrated. So we built separate outside caller interfaces for a number of the interfaces. And we did that for our speech rec as well. Now what that means is when somebody calls and it's speech rec up front, and so they're used to talking, they ask for you by name, they ask for department by name, etc. When that call comes back, we're not suddenly asking them to press keys. Particularly in today's mobile world where, you might have called in from your Bluetooth connection in your car, and it comes back, and then it comes back and says, please press this key for this feature. That's very awkward. So our outside caller interface is part of our speech recognition app as well. And then the third piece is our user interface, which is an incredible tool for productivity. Certainly anytime you're in a hands-free, eyes-free environment, the primary one, of course, being the car, driving in your car when you'd like to be productive, and hopefully you're not one of those persons that balances their mobile phone on their knee and tries to do messaging while they're driving down the road. There's a much safer way, and that's with a speech rec interface. So let's talk by looking at speech rec automated attendant. This is probably one of the easiest ones to look at from an ROI point of view, from a cost justification, from an obvious benefit point of view. And that's because of what it does is it actually lowers your labor costs for human attendants. Now, a lot of companies have speech rec directories where you can go in and you can say somebody's name, but anything else you want to do, you have to press keys. So, go ahead and say the name of the person you want, or, if you want to transfer to this department, press 1. To hear this announcement, press 2. Ours is completely speech. Now, it can mix speech and touch tone. There's, once you have an automated attendant and you've put the nuanced resources on the CX system, in that menu, you have your choice of speech or touch tone, or both at the same time throughout. Now, there's some systems that'll actually let you have speech, but if you want to do touch tone, they move you to another menu. And that kind of awkwardness is something that we got over years ago. So that whole capability for everything that we do can be speech enabled in an automated attendant. And we'll show you a couple of examples of that as we go forward. Our speech capability is multilingual. You can have up to 5 speech recognition languages on a single CX system. Our language library is not very wide yet, but we do the most important ones certainly for North America and for parts of Europe and South America. The concept of an automated attendant, seems very simple, where somebody's going to call in and say the name of the person they're looking for. But the truth is, in our world, which is the enterprise, we're not necessarily calling into a single location. So if you think about a company that puts CXE in, and they end up with 5 different sites being supported by this single CXE system, and a call comes into, let's say, site 3, and it's the automated attendant, and they say, who do you want to talk to? What names do you want to recognize there? In some cases, if your architecture is such that you can transfer calls among all those sites easily, you might want to look at the entire user group. In other cases, you might only want to look at the users at that location. So when I say John Tyler, I only want to see John Tyler that's at that particular location. So a partitioned directory for different sites, different locations, or departmentally. You might have a system that takes you to the sales menu, and then when it says, say the name of the salesperson you'd like to reach, you would only want to look at salespeople. So our ability to not just have automated attendant, but to break it down in partitioned directories makes it much more usable, much more powerful. We do the same thing for our DTMF automated attendants, by the way. If you want to do a dial by name by spelling the name, we can break that up the same way. So that's the kind of functionality that, after a few years of having customers, kindly remind you things you might have left out of the system, you get that sort of functionality into the system. So as you look at hooking this up today, on your systems, you have whatever phone system you have, and we are truly agnostic in the world of telephony systems. As far as we're concerned, whatever phone system you have and or want is the correct one, and we'll make sure our product works with that. And that makes it a lot easier for us to have these discussions with customers who either have a specific system, obviously, that they want to make sure we work with, or have a mix of systems. Again, a lot of our enterprise customers, have 8 locations and 4 different kinds of phone systems. It's not like the world grew up rational as that enterprise grew and consolidated and acquired companies. So it's good to know that whatever you have, you're going to be able to take all this functionality and work right along with it. The scheduling piece for automated attendant is equally important and equally ignored, unfortunately, by a lot of vendors. A lot of people take their legacy system and replace it with a newer system, only to find out the things they were doing in answering the way they answered phone calls can't be duplicated in the newer systems. So if you think of somebody taking out an old Octel system, they might have had all the different holiday greetings. They might have had one department that answered with night mode up to 9 o'clock in the morning, but another department that started day mode at 6 a.m. And they needed this flexibility. We have that flexibility. We have unlimited flexibility in our automated attendant scheduling. And not only can you lay out anything you want, but you can lay out all your holidays in advance. You can route differently based on DNIS, DID, and even ANI numbers if you want. And when things change suddenly on you, which they certainly will, for example, you're the administrator and you roll over at 2 o'clock and look out the window and there's 2 feet of snow on the ground, we'll let you change that answer mode without having to get out of bed and go, log into your computer. You can do it over the telephone with commands, or you can do it from your web phone or from your mobile phone website or your PC website. So the automated attendant isn't just speech enabled. It's our powerful system that's been around for years, speech enabled. That makes a big difference. When you're looking at a speech automated attendant, the things you want to look for, besides just, you can say the name and transfer, is not everyone's going to want to be in that speech directory. So we have the ability for the administrator to set up each user to opt in or out of the speech directory. And not everybody has, everyone asking for them with the same name. You might have somebody named John Tyler, but other people might ask for Jonathan Tyler, or he might be known as JT, or he might be Dr. Jonathan Tyler. And you need to make sure that your system is capable of handling all those different kinds of alias names, which of course we can, and we can do it from an import list, by the way. We won't require you to go to every single mailbox and type in all the aliases for people. As part of our professional services, if we're installing it, we'll actually look at your names list and make recommendations for the aliases you might want to put in there. And then, of course, you'll know some things as well that we don't. And alias names are also great for names that don't sound and look the same. And I had a friend back earlier. He's not with us anymore at the company, but his name was Sanji Bhutat. And there was like 9 extra letters in that name, the way it was written. And it was very easy, though, for us to go in and do basically a phonetic translation as an alias so that that call completion could happen. There's also people with the same name, so you're going to have disambiguation. I could have a John Tyler in accounting and a John Tyler in sales. And what you want to be able to do is let people say that name and then come back to them and give them a choice and say, do you mean John Tyler? And that would be recorded in John Tyler's name in sales, or John Tyler, and that would be recorded in the other John Tyler's name in operations. So that ability to, when a user gets there, to have them successfully navigate the system requires a lot more than just a speech rec. It requires a program where you've done all that kind of work. And things like transferring out to departments and all the functionality you can imagine. We've spent the time with it. Now, typically, the speech name directory comes from our user directory. Probably 9 out of 10 times, all the users, that's whose names you will say. But we also have cases where people want other names in the directory, or they want to synchronize that names directory with an external program. And for that, we have a really great API where we, as professional services, or probably your people in your IT department, can write a little program that updates that directory every night based on a personnel list or Active Directory or whatever you would want to do that on. So let's take a look at kind of what it's like here in terms of having a speech automated attendant. So here's a typical greeting. At any time during this greeting, you can simply say the name of the person or the department you want to reach. For a listed department, say options. You could also say for sales, say sales. Or you could say for sales, say sales or press 1. You can still give people DTMF options as you want. Person picks a name, John Tyler. If you have call screening turned on for that user, and this is a user by user choice, it'll come back and say, who's calling, please? And the caller will speak their name. Now, the value of that is when this caller receives that call, he will hear, you have a call from Mark Reed, and then he'll be given options in terms of whether he wants to take that call or not. System typically says 1 moment, please. So we talked about that outside caller interface and how it's important for the continuity of the call, to be speech rec from beginning to end, to not confuse the user, to make it easy to use. So now I go ahead and say Mark Reed, and it says 1 moment, please. It rings his phone, and John doesn't answer because for whatever reason. It brings the call back. It then says, John Tyler is not available. Please say locate, leave a message, try another person or operator. So not only am I still in the speech recognition paradigm, but I'm giving them other choices. And then depending on what features the user has, these choices vary a little bit. But it's much better to be speech rec from start to end and not confuse the callers. The user interface would be the last piece we'd look at. I've had a speech recognition user interface for about 14 years now. I tend to forget that other people don't have them. So sometimes I don't even talk about it as one of our new and exciting features, and I really should, because in terms of productivity for mobile workers, this is the #1 thing you can give your mobile workers to increase their productivity, to reduce the latency in the communications with them and their customers and their coworkers, because this converts a lot of normally unproductive time into productive time. I will get in my car every day and head out my driveway and hit my Bluetooth button, and the system will come back and say, "Hello, Neil, what would you like to do?" And at that point, using speech recognition, I can read my calendar. I can say, what are my meetings for today? I can say, what are my new messages? Read my email to me, play my voice messages. I can read an email and realize, that's something I need to talk to somebody about, and I can make a call all in the same session without ever touching anything. I can do that same 20 minutes of triage that I would do when I got to work and booted up my system. I can read my messages, I can make calls, I can set up new meetings, I can read my existing meetings, I can forward messages, not just to other people on my system, but to people in my contacts. By having speech recognition, I really widen up my accessible group to include my contacts. So I can forward a message to Mark Reed, who's in my contacts. I can record a new voice message for Mark Reed, who's in my contacts. And what actually happens there is Mark Reed will get an email with a WAV file attachment of that voicemail. So the ability to kind of more quickly respond to what's going on in your environment makes for speech recognition, in my book, the #1 productivity enhancer. And here's just kind of how it sounds. I mean, it's very basic and straightforward. And I noticed here that, I have them saying get new messages, which you can say. And that's kind of the rookie. That's what you'd think first, right? Get new messages. You might want to say, oh, get email messages. Or you might want to say, get new email messages from John Tyler. Or you might want to say, get read messages from John Tyler. Get new voicemail, get read voicemail. There's, I don't know, probably 50 or 60 combinations that are there that you can learn as you go along. But the day you use it the first time, the odds of you saying get new messages are pretty high. And if you say something that it doesn't accept, it will come back and say, would you like help? What help category for messaging? And then it'll say, you can say, and it'll read out all those options for you. So this is a very easy system to transition to. I mean, it's fantastic to have speech rec after it's all in, but that initial transition has to be as painless as possible as well. So here I'm looking at, and I have 3 unread messages. I'm going to read a message. I can forward that message to another user. I can save it. I can delete it. I can read an email message the same exact way, forward it, delete it. I can reply to an external email message with a voicemail. So I can actually say, somebody leaves me an email message like this one, call me as soon as you can. Well, that's an email message, but if I say reply, since when this came in, it was an email message, I know the sender's email message, it will let me record the reply and send it back. So replying to callers and email messages, it's all very transparent. It all works the same way. So you get in this regular working habit of basically doing the same thing that you can do when you're at your desk, creating a virtual environment, a virtual desktop through the speech recognition interfaces. And the call front end is, for most of our salespeople and even some of our traveling technicians, this is one of their favorite features, because if we have speech or call screening turned on, which we talked about earlier, and they answer the call, here's what they're going to see. They're going to hear, first, you have a call from the caller's name. Please say accept, which will connect the call, reject, which will send it to voicemail, or acknowledge. Acknowledge will then prompt them to record a personal message for that caller without them committing right now to take the call. So imagine you're sitting outside, waiting to be called into a meeting, and the phone rings, and you get this call, and that door's going to open for you any second. You could say acknowledge, and then you could say, Mark, listen, I'm just getting ready to go into the meeting. I'll give you a call as soon as I get out. So that ability to play personal acknowledgement messages back to callers. Or you might recognize Mark's name and know you don't have time to take the call, but you're working with another person, so you could transfer the call to them. Or you could transfer the call to a different device, from your desktop to your mobile, or your mobile back to your desktop. So the ability to screen that call with a speech recognition interface is very powerful. Now, some of that functionality is there to do that screening as well, even in a DTMF only system, but a lot of it works a lot better with the speech recognition piece there. The calendar piece is an interesting piece to me because I rarely use it, except for reading my appointments. When I'm heading into work every day, I don't use it that much. But some of the people who are on the road more often than I am, they really live and die by this speech interface. They create new meetings. They'll call in, they'll get a message that one of their customers would say, could you come out and see us at 2 o'clock on Friday? Right then and there, they'll say, you know, main menu, what would you like to do? Create a new meeting, when? Next Friday, what time? Or once they're used to it, they say, create a new meeting Friday at 2 o'clock for 2 hours. The system, once again, is very smart in terms about how it can handle the things that a customer says. So that calendar access for people who are truly mobile, I think, comes in as one of the higher rating features. Now this screen I keep meaning to change. It's 100% accurate and 99% useless, I think, because I've never known anyone to call in and get contact info. I mean, why do you want to have the system read back contact info? It will. It'll tell you, you know, their name, their email address, their phone number, their mobile phone number. You can get all that. But if you want it to use it, you would probably use that contact access just to use it. In other words, rather than ask what the email address is, I could probably just say record a message and then send it to that email address. I can use that contact info because it's integrated. So having that contacts access really widens what you can do on the system. Most systems will let you do things with other users on the system. We widen it up to your real work area, which includes your contacts. So we usually throw a little piece in here to talk about customers who have used this, and we have hundreds, if not thousands, of customers that we could put you in touch with that have turned on the speech rec automated attendant, the speech user interface. One of the ones just recently was Navy Pier in Chicago, a big amusement area in Chicago, and they have a lot of interesting challenges for phones. This is not your typical business with just people sitting in desks throughout. They have all the tenant stores, they have all the they have a big educational area, they have a bunch of recreational pieces, and they basically looked and said, you know, we need special handling for incoming calls. People call us asking for all sorts of things. Directories. They want to go to the different facilities that are here. They're looking for people. They're looking for hours of operation. They want to know what's playing at the movie theater. And so for them, a simple speech automated attendant that would only do name recognition wasn't going to cut it. So what they did was decided they needed speech recognition, and they needed something that had all the features. They needed the full automated attendant, everything. They needed control over the directories. And if they were going to put this in, and being in Chicago, I'm sure had to do with this, you know, they probably all have terrible commute times, so they also wanted to make sure that they could use the speech recognition at the same time for their users. So that whole comply with the hands-free laws piece, and the ability to stay in touch when you're driving, all of that, they saw the value in that. So they deployed the full suite of speech recognition. Now, for some of you out there, you already have a CX system or an older Call Express system. You're really close to being able to have all this functionality. All you need, I mean, you have the automated attendant, you have the scheduling. All you need to do is add the nuanced speech resources to the system, and you now can turn on all this functionality. Once you put the nuance engine in place, there's no charge for menus. There's no charge to turn a user into a speech user. There's no charge for the outside caller interface. You just need to figure out how many speech recognition licenses you need and enable that on the system. When I am involved in webinars directly to customers, particularly when they're looking at our system and they're trying to decide if they're going to buy it, I always recommend buy at least one speech recognition resource. Because with that one resource, you can try all of this out. You can build a menu and see what it sounds like. You can use it as a user. You can try the outside caller interface. You can go through and make sure that this is something that you think you could use. And then you can figure out if this is something you want to deploy. Adding, in the cost of buying a system in particular, adding one speech recognition license is really, really trivial. So from my point of view, speech is about productivity, both your user's productivity and your customer's productivity, because of the way it reduces latency. The odds of a customer getting through to you, getting through to one of your employees, getting a good response, getting a response to an email quicker, all of that goes up when you speech enable a CX system. And that brings us here.
Okay, thanks so much, Neil. For any of you that would like to submit a question, if you haven't already, use the orange arrow in the upper corner, and then you should be able to expand the webinar options there and see the question box toward the bottom. So, Neil, I think you covered this a little bit. The question may have been submitted beforehand, but I'll ask it anyway. So, how do you handle difficult to pronounce names? And then there's a second question that kind of relates to this. Can the caller switch to the option of spelling the name with phone keys?
So while we can't switch to the option of spelling it with keys, you can drop out to a menu, another menu where you'll have dial by name. In other words, if you say, if you say the name once and it doesn't work, and say it twice, and you actually are pretty sure you know how to spell it, then we can have a choice in that menu that takes you to a DTMF version that will let you spell that menu. The first one's a little more interesting answer, I think. Every system I've ever put in, there are names that look and sound different. That's just the way the language is. Whether it's an English, completely English, or English is a second language name, we're going to run into that. The first level that we address is what we discussed, which is alias names. We can actually go in and simply by spelling it phonetically, we can probably catch 99% of those names. Every now and then, we have a name on a system where we're using American English speech recognition, and the last name is, let's say, French, where it's really hard to get a sound spelled in French using the English phonetics. And for that, there's a lower level diagnostic that we can actually do kind of phoneme by phoneme, build something that should be able to recognize that name. But that is very rare. I would say most times, when we look at the initial cut, if our professional services is involved, and I'm sure our dealers do this the same way, we would look at that directory and we'd pick out the names we know automatically. People are going to get those wrong, so here's a couple of alternate spellings. Then we'd go through with the users and make sure that we would do that. Sometimes departmental names, we have to do that same thing with, depending on what you're trying, what you're trying to transfer to. But mapping it simply with phonetic spellings, 99% gets covered.
Okay. Next question, can the mobile users use speech to reply to email with dictation?
No, not yet, and that's that difference between speech for commands, which is speaker independent, and speaker dependent. So there's technology out there that we're evaluating to do that, but today it doesn't work that way.
Okay, and you did mention as well, though, that a user can reply to an email and it sends a voice recording.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. It'll send them a WAV file recording, which pretty much anybody's going to be able to play on their machine.
Okay, great. Okay, there's a question about architecture, so I'll ask this, and then I'm not sure, it may be more appropriate to follow up with the attendee offline.
Sure.
Can you provide a brief architecture overview as it relates to the Avaya integration?
Sure, and it's going to depend. Assuming a new Avaya system where SIP the SIP protocol is enabled on the Avaya PBX, we would integrate either directly to the Avaya system with SIP trunks, or through Session Manager, which is their kind of SIP routing device. Either way, the SIP would be carrying all the call setup, and then we're using RTP for the audio streams. So a very, very typical kind of SIP connection.
Okay, next question. Is there a tool to test the phonetic spelling?
There's a tool that gives you some of it, but honestly, although I've used it a number of times, I haven't found it so helpful that I'd want to say, yes, that's how you would do it. It's pretty much going to be trial and error.
Okay, thanks, Neil, so much. Let's see, here's one more. I've been using the speech command features. Oh, sorry, this is just a comment. Okay, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. It looks like that's all the questions I'm scrolling through. Just one more reminder really quickly that we will make the slides available to you as well as the recording in the follow-up email that will be generated later today, so you can look for that. And in addition, I will include a link to some additional upcoming webinars that we have in case you'd like to join us again on a different topic. And just want to, again, thank everyone for taking the time to join us today, and I'll let Neil say goodbye as well.
Thank you, Ann. I'd also like to extend my thanks. One other thing about this topic in particular, if you have an interest, you might want to consider contacting your dealer or one of our dealers or us directly. You can always get to us at info@avst.com, and we can set up a situation where you can experience the speech rec interface. We can get you into a menu where you can try it. We can get you a mailbox where you can sign on and try the user interface. More than a lot of technologies, hearing and speaking is believing with speech recognition, and we fully understand why somebody might want to take a little closer look at it. So hopefully you found this helpful, and hopefully you'll continue showing up these webinars and get some more useful information. Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
To learn more about AVST, please visit www.avst.com.